You good as well? All right, I'll get it kick-started. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Appleton International Airport. I'm Abe Weber, the airport director. Excited to have you all out here. As well, I'm joined by Tommy Winkler, administrator of the Wisconsin Department of Motor Vehicles, and Mark Lenve, the federal security director for the Transportation Security Administration. We're all here to touch base on the upcoming Real ID enforcement deadline. And at Appleton Airport, we've seen tremendous growth over the past several years. We've doubled our passengers. We've added several nonstop destinations, going from 7 up to 19. And then this past year, 2024, we eclipsed the 1 million passenger mark. So that was a record for our airport. And then we're coming off the heels of one of the busiest spring breaks in our history as well, up 25%. We saw passengers through the checkpoint. So incredible growth. And that's why it's so important for us to be part of this event, to make sure that when customers come to the airport, when they come to use the airport, there's no interruptions in their travel. We have more and more passengers choosing Appleton Airport, and so we want to make sure that people are ready with the Real ID by May 7th. And I know that our team at the airport works very hard at providing an exceptional customer experience. That's why we want to make sure that no one's travel gets interrupted for something that you could take care of ahead of time. And so with that, I will turn it over to our Federal Security Director, Mr. Mark Lenve. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I am Mark Lenve. Spelling is L-E-N-D-V-A-Y, and I'm the Federal Security Director for TSA, Department of Homeland Security here in Wisconsin. I want to thank our media outlets for being with us this morning as we provide specific information on Real ID, which becomes effective May 7th of this year. I also want to thank Abe Weber, our airport director, as well as our administrator for the Department of Motor Vehicles, Tommy Winkler, who will be coming up after me to talk about, from a state level, what you need to do as a consumer to obtain that identification. So beginning May 7th of this year, every air traveler at the age of 18 or older must have a Real ID or an alternative compliant ID if you want to travel. If you don't have a Real ID by this time frame, your travel experience may be delayed through our nation's airports. By way of history, Congress passed the Real ID Act in 2005 to enhance security standards for identification for our federal facilities, military installations, and air travel. Identification verification is the foundation to security, and the TSA has made significant investments in this area, in particular with their credentialing authentication technology, as you can see behind me at our checkpoint. If you use a current driver's license or a state identity card as the primary form of identification to access federal facilities, military installations, and or board commercial aircraft, please make certain that those credentials are Real ID compliant, and you can denote that by the star here on the driver's license. Here in Wisconsin, the good news is that nearly 63% of issued driver's license consist of Real IDs, which is again identified with the star. Alternatively, if you do not have the Real ID, please review the list of other acceptable identification cards at the TSA website at tsa.gov. Some examples of other acceptable IDs are as follows: the U.S. passport, and I have mine with me today, U.S. passport cards, the DHS Trusted Traveler Program cards, in particular the Global Entry, the United States Department of Defense IDs, including IDs issued to dependents, and finally the Transportation Worker Identification Card, or TWIC card, issued by the TSA. So what's going to happen May 7th? Our security officers at our nation's airports will start enforcing the ID requirements for the Real ID at our ticket document checker positions. Individuals without the Real ID or an acceptable ID could be delayed going through our screening checkpoints. TSA remains committed to continually educating our traveling public on this forthcoming requirement And if you have additional questions, again, please visit our website. Two things this morning I want to stress. State of Wisconsin, when you renew your driver's license, issues a paper document, which is good for approximately 30 days. That paper document is not acceptable at a ticket document checker position. So if you're getting the ID replaced, and for instance, you're doing it online, we suggest if you're able to retain the old driver's license, because we will still accept that at our nation's airports. So again, the paper tickets that you're getting or license would not be acceptable. And then for trusted traveler, our pre-check population, which is at 20 million right now, those individuals are not issued a government ID, and a lot of those individuals may not have real ID. So although you're a trusted traveler, you're still going to be required to have the real ID on the day of travel, May 7th. I want to thank you for your time today. And now I'd like to turn the podium over to our Administrator for Department of Motor Vehicles, Tommy Winkler. Mr. Winkler.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mark. I want to thank our partners at the Transportation Security Administration for the collaboration that we've had over these past several years to prepare for this Real ID implementation date. So, as Mark said, my name's Tommy Winkler. I'm the Administrator of the Wisconsin Division of Motor Vehicles, and I guess we have a good news to say this morning. Wisconsin, we're Real ID ready. As Mark indicated, nearly 64% of all valid driver license and ID cards in Wisconsin are Real ID compliant today. That's over 3.1 million driver license and ID cards. Wisconsin, we began issuing Real ID compliant driver licenses and IDs back in January of 2013. So we've been doing this for over a decade, and we've given all of our Wisconsin residents the opportunity to upgrade to the Real ID at the time of their driver license or identification card renewal. As Mark mentioned, a month from today, beginning May 7th, 2025, enforcement of the Real ID Act begins. And in order to enter a federal facility, a military base, or to go through a airport checkpoint to board a commercial aircraft here in the United States, you'll need to present a Real ID compliant form of identification. A valid passport satisfies that, but for many folks here in Wisconsin, that will be a Real ID compliant driver license or ID card, as indicated by the star, the black star in the upper right-hand corner of the driver license or ID card. So, for those who may need a Real ID compliant driver license or identification card still, what do you need to do to prepare your visit to a DMV to obtain that credential? So the best and most important thing customers in our state should do is visit our website, wisconsindmv.gov. And there on our main page, you'll find a link to the driver license and identification card guide. This is an interactive guide that will walk customers through the documentation that they will need to bring in order to obtain that Real ID. It also allows customers to pre-fill out their application prior to their visit, and you can even schedule an appointment for service at a DMV customer service center. By using that DLID guide and making that appointment for service, you will make your trip successful and fast when you come to the DMV to upgrade to a Real ID. What is some of that documentation that you'll need to bring in order to obtain that Real ID? You're going to need to provide original or certified copies of documents that provide proof of name and date of birth and legal presence. For many here in the state, that can be a certified copy of your birth certificate or a valid U.S. passport. You'll also need to provide proof of identity, which for many, that'll just be the existing driver license or ID card that you have. You'll also need to provide proof of 2 forms of address. So that's a utility bill, a bank statement, any government issued correspondence that has your name and address on it will satisfy that proof of address requirement. You'll also need to know your social security number and provide that at your visit. And then if your name is different than the name on your birth certificate, you will need to provide proof of each of those name changes. And typically that is a marriage certificate or a divorce decree to prove the name change. Again, original or certified copies of those documents, you bring that in, you pre-fill out the app ahead of time, make a service appointment, we'll get you in and out with a Real ID in no time. Here in Wisconsin, customers have the option whether or not to obtain a Real ID. If customers are not going to travel, they're not going to enter a military base or a federal facility, they do not need a Real ID compliant product. The best time to obtain a Real ID compliant product is when you are renewing your driver license or ID card. If you upgrade to Real ID then, there is no additional fee. If, however, you are going to fly on or after May 7th of this year and you need a Real ID compliant document and you are not due for renewal, you can go through that process, visit our DMV, and get a duplicate driver license or ID card that's Real ID compliant, and there's a fee of $14 for that. I want to thank, again, our partners at TSA, the Appleton International Airport, and airports throughout the state as we've worked to communicate to customers, inform them about what they need to do to be Real ID ready come May 7th, 2025. Thank you.
We can take questions, if anybody has questions for the administrator or the federal security director.
Yeah, I have a question. How many times has Real ID been, I guess, delayed, pushed back, things like that? Just for clarification.
Yeah. So, great question on how many times it's been delayed. So the actual bill was passed in 2005. We're probably looking at 3 separate delays, significant delays. And let me give you the background in terms of the delays. This was not an easy lift for states to go ahead and revamp the driver's license credential with the security features that were needed. So clearly the states needed amount of time to be able to develop the ID, educate their citizens, the communities, and then come up with the standard necessary documents, as our administrator explained. So it was, a lift that we knew was going to take some time. Part of that too was balancing air travel with record numbers through the last 3 years. And as the airport director here shared with you, we saw significant growth here in Appleton at 25%. Nationwide, we had 3.2 million go through during the holiday season. So with us going forward, this will be a phased-in approach. But definitely May 7th is the deadline. And again, I think the partnership that you're seeing today is not unlike other communities where FSDs and administrators are standing together and really going forward with a full court press on it. So,
How long has Real ID been available in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so Wisconsin began issuing Real ID compliant driver license and ID cards back in January of 2013. So we've been doing this for over 12 years now.
I have a question for you. Why are you urging travelers to make the transition to Real ID now versus later?
we were and have been doing media events like this today over the years. So it's always been a, I'll say, pressing on the traveler to get the real ID. The other thing that we did parallel is with our Trusted Traveler program, in a particular global entry, where that credential serves as another alternative form of identification, much like the passports. So if you looked at the time it takes to get a passport, which takes some time to get through the process, we were also building not only Real ID, but the alternative documents that federal government was issuing that would offset those instances where Real ID wasn't prevalent in the community or the consumer didn't have access to it.
And also, more so, I was, I guess, hoping you would say something like, I see in other states like Philadelphia, much larger, people were, it's hard to get appointments right now, and the longer you wait, you may find yourself in a situation where you want to travel. You talk about that may be a reason also why you want to get it.
Sure. I mean, we have states, and I'll let Tommy come up to talk state of Wisconsin, but we do have states that are much further behind than Wisconsin is. And I think that's where it's important to look at those other alternative forms of identification. And I would offer that global entry right now, if you go online, you're able to apply online. There is a interview process, but to go through that process would not be any different than it would be to go to your local DMV. You do have some states that are having pop-up centers to try to accommodate. I know our friends to the south in Illinois have done that in downtown Chicago. That's an effort to obviously gain the population to have the necessary documents before that May 7th.
And is there a grace period after May 7th? A grace period. Is there a grace period after May 7th?
Now, this will continue. So from a federal TSA standpoint, this will be a phased approach. So we'll probably be out within the year explaining what that next phase looks like for those individuals that still do not have the real ID. Today, if you go through our checkpoints anywhere in the country, the TSA officer is providing a QR code, and we can provide it to the media today what that looks like for individuals that are presenting themselves without the real ID. And the QR code is really providing not only the website for TSA, but the background information and what the other acceptable IDs are that those individuals have access to.
Yeah, and in terms of real ID issuance, like I mentioned, we've been doing this since 2013, so we've given everyone that opportunity at renewal to upgrade. We're over 3.1 million driver license and ID cards that are real ID compliant. That's nearly 64% here in the state. If someone does need that real ID driver license or identification card to fly, the best thing they can do again is to go to our website and go through that interactive driver license and ID card guide. We have service appointments available at our 80 offices throughout the state. There aren't delays in getting an appointment for service. And really, by the customer doing that, preparing the checklist of documents to bring in and pre-filling that application out ahead of time, it's going to help make that transaction very fast and efficient in our service centers. So we strive to serve over 80% of our customers in 20 minutes or less when they come to the DMV. And by our customers helping us by going online and preparing their visit, we don't anticipate any concerns in continuing to keep wait times low for customers with a little bit of increased volume from the Real ID enforcement date. Thanks.
What's the significance of that 63% real ID ready for the state of Wisconsin?
So I think it just shows the majority of people who will need a Real ID compliant product. As Mark mentioned, many already have a valid passport or some other global entry, some other identification that will satisfy the requirement. And then there's a portion of the population in this state, they're never going to fly again. They're not going to go on a military base or enter a federal facility, so they'll never need a Real ID. So we thought as we get close to that 2/3 mark, that would almost be the full population of folks who would actually need to have a Real ID compliant product, driver license or ID card for federal purposes. So we feel very proud about where we're at in terms of the compliance rate. We think we're pretty close to the full number of people who would need that going forward.
So I mentioned the QR code. We'll provide this to the media examples. So today, and this has been ongoing now for almost a year, where in our nation's airports, our TSA officials are providing this to individuals that are showing up without either the real ID or acceptable form of identification. So again, when you look at when this bill was passed and the educational efforts in coordination with state DMVs, it's really been a, I'll say, ramp up to the May 7th deadline. I can share with you, just looking at the data that TSA has on a national front, we're probably at about 86% across our enterprise. So there's 430 commercial airports here in the United States, and we're running at about 86%. So that difference at 100%, we are not able to identify the number of passports. We do have the global ID numbers, but we believe from a federal standpoint that the system come May 7th, we'll have some disruptions in terms of those individuals, but overall I think it's going to transition fairly seamless in the enterprise. Those individuals without the IDs will in fact be delayed though going through our checkpoints. So if you know you're arriving at the airport, you don't have the ID, definitely allow some time before you get stuck and unfortunately potentially miss the flight. So.
Anything else? Good. Thank you.
Good questions, by the way.
We can get B-roll